on behalf of UNDP, UNCDF, and the Better Than Cash Alliance, welcome. So glad that you're here today to join us on such a beautiful day and in such a fabulous location. So I hope you enjoyed it. Today, our topic is Partnerships for Digital Financial Inclusion, a driver of inclusive growth. And we really hope today that your ideas will be expanded by our speakers of how we can achieve our common goal of inclusive growth with poverty reduction. The Better Than Cash Alliance was founded exactly a year ago to work with governments and the private sector and development organizations to help transition cash payments to electronic or digital payments. For example, whether it's government social protection programs, supply chains for private sector, or whether it's the humanitarian aid that development organizations are providing, how can the shift to electronic payments be accelerated to result in financial inclusion, significant cost savings, increased transparency and anti-corruption, efficiency, as well as other benefits in the business world? So, I just want to recognize our member countries who are here today. Of course, our friends from Malawi and the Philippines who are speaking, as well as particularly Afghanistan and Colombia and Peru and Uganda. And Kenya sent their apologies. As you know, they're facing a very difficult time at the moment. So I also want to acknowledge our funders who made all this possible at the Better Than Cash Alliance, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Ford Foundation, Omidyar Network, USAID and Visa Inc., as well as our newest funder, MasterCard. So with all those appropriate introductions and welcome, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Helen Clark, the administrator of UNDP. It is my great privilege to introduce her. Ms. Clark became administrator of UNDP in 2009. She is the first woman to have led this global organization. She also chairs the UN Development Group, which comprises the heads of all the UN funds, programs, and departments working on development issues. Ms. Clark previously served for 9 years as Prime Minister of New Zealand, 3 successive terms, which is pretty impressive for a politician, as I'm sure you well know. And she's a fixture on the Forbes list of the world's 100 most powerful women. I think number 21 at the moment. So, but for us here today, Ms. Clark has been a leading voice on digitization of payments. She has been encouraging UNDP and the other agencies to digitize their cash payments. And this has had a tremendous impact for clients and governments around the world. We are grateful for UNDP's leadership at the Better Than Cash Alliance. UNDP is on our governing body, and we're grateful for Ms. Clark coming to speak to us today. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you to my fellow Antipodean, Ruth. Can I acknowledge Your Majesty, Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, and UN Secretary General Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, the Honourable Minister of Economic Planning and Development from Malawi, His Excellency the Ambassador of the Republic of the Philippines to the United States of America, Mr. Bill Gates, co-chair of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and all our other speakers, distinguished guests, excellencies present. And welcome to this event, Partnerships for Digital Financial Inclusion, a driver of inclusive growth, which is being hosted by UNDP, the UN Capital Development Fund, and the Better Than Cash Alliance. Well, we have a rather broad turnout today from across governments, private sector, civil society, development partners. It's only a little over 2 years until the 2015 date for achieving the MDGs is reached. And as everyone in this well-informed audience knows, debate about what next is well underway. The importance of promoting growth which is inclusive, sustainable and equitable is featuring largely in the discussion, but often the question remains, well, how is that going to be achieved? One thing is for sure, technologies will play a critical role. And the rapid spread of new information and communications technologies, and in particular, I submit the mobile ones, is increasingly making many more services available to the world's poorest people. Recent estimates by the ITU suggest there are already close to 7 billion mobile phone subscriptions out there, with 89% mobile cellular penetration in developing countries. Access to the mobile phone can be a game changer for the poor, particularly for those 2.5 billion adults who don't currently have access to financial services. Yet, we know such access can and does contribute to poverty alleviation, to development and to growth. With mobile technology, it is within reach. At UNDP, we've been involved with a number of initiatives which have embraced digital financial inclusion. One, following the devastating earthquake in Haiti, where we were part of an initiative which aimed to help Haitians rebuild their own homes. In a country where only 10% of the population have access to conventional financial services, but 50% do have access to a phone. So there was an innovative partnership, Government of Haiti, Digicel and UNDP, with what I'm told is the first ever mobile money transfer mechanism for supporting post-disaster housing reconstruction. And it enabled Haitians to get access to funding for the materials they needed to rebuild their homes, with many thousands of people benefiting from the program. Another innovation was associated with the rollout of India's National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme, which guarantees 100 days of employment every year for rural workers. When this was established in 2005, most of those who came into the program did not have access to financial services, which made payments to them for their work rather difficult. But responding to that challenge, the state governments in India, in partnership with UNDP, worked with local banks and the mobile phone providers to enable rural workers to open bank accounts and use their phones to access their funds remotely. And many, many millions of people have subsequently been able to access basic financial services there through their phones. We're seeing the use of other technologies too, including but not limited to prepaid cards and point-of-sale devices, opening up opportunity for greater access to financial services. Take Fiji, where through the Pacific Financial Inclusion Program, UNDP and UNCDF have been working with the Department of Social Welfare to ensure that many thousands of social welfare recipients get their benefits on time and without the long and often rather costly journeys they had to make to pick up their cash. We've worked in partnership with Westpac Banking Corporation. Social welfare benefits are now distributed across Fiji through Westpac's network of branches, ATMs and point-of-sale devices. In the process, communities which previously didn't have access to banking are able to access flexible, no-fee accounts. The Department of Social Welfare says, well, now they have more time to spend on family visits and child protection. Well, they've also been able to cut their costs, reduce the number of ghost recipients, and cut fraud. Meanwhile, Westpac expanded its clientele by nearly 15% in the first few months of the scheme and extended its reach in the rural areas. So this truly was a win-win. Fiji's government has now moved on to require that all communal land lease payments, which are mostly made to rural communities, must move to an electronic platform. Financial institutions, government ministries, and central banks around the region are taking a great interest in these innovations out of Fiji. At UNDP, we see so much potential for digital technologies to open up access to financial services and drive down the costs. It can ensure that money reaches the people it should reach in a more timely, more transparent and accountable way. All these initiatives rest on partnerships which bring together leadership, expertise, experience, and yes, funding. In each of the cases I've cited, there have been multiple players across government, private sector, development partners, civil society organisations. It's the partnerships which have made the innovation and the success possible. At UNDP, we firmly believe that by partnering and leveraging the world's current digital transformation, financial inclusion and inclusive growth can be significantly advanced. And later in this session, we will be hearing from leaders in the field on how they see digital technology driving greater financial inclusion. I think the Better Than Cash Alliance is an exciting example of the potential of such partnerships, and we're proud to be part of it at UNDP. It has the financial support of founding partners, including the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Citigroup, Ford Foundation, Omidyar Network, USAID and Visa, and with additional funding from MasterCard. So it's bringing together governments, private sector, development organisations to promote the shift from cash to electronic payments. To date, 6 countries and 10 development organisations, including UNDP, have made commitments under the Better Than Cash initiative to push significant volumes of money through electronic payments. Again, a number of our partners are here today, and they'll be sharing their experiences with us. So, in conclusion, big opportunities exist to promote financial inclusion through new technologies, and through that, to drive that inclusive and sustainable growth the world needs. And I hope today's event will strengthen the partnerships around this so that we can make even more of the opportunities. Now, it's my pleasant duty to introduce our next speaker. And our next speaker is Her Majesty Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, acting for a number of years now in her previous capacity as Crown Princess and now as Queen of the Netherlands as the Secretary-General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development. Queen Maxima is a very active global voice on the importance of inclusive finance for development and achieving economic goals. She's been a leader and a champion on this for years. Her role, designated by the Secretary-General, goes back to 2009, and in that role she encourages universal access for people and enterprises at a reasonable cost to a wide range of financial services provided by responsible institutions. Queen Maxima works in partnership with stakeholders globally, raising awareness, encouraging leadership, fostering action, drawing on experiences from her country visits and her conversations with the poorest families, small business owners, the policymakers, to identify which financial services and policies could really make a difference for people's lives and livelihoods. Queen Maxima is honorary patron of the G20 Global Partnership for Financial Inclusion these past 2 years, and has also championed it in her own country, particularly in the areas of financial literacy and education. Queen Maxima, we're so privileged to have you with us today, and please come and address the audience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Clark. There was quite a lengthy introduction. Excellencies, Ms. Clark, Oniyuma, Mr. Gates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really happy to be with you again 1 year after the launch of the Better Than Cash initiative and alliance. As leaders gather in New York for the General Assembly, an important topic is how to accomplish the MDGs and how to define the development agenda that will follow 2015. Better Than Cash does deliver a timely message that digital technology is not only making financial inclusion possible, but that also it brings the potential to accelerate equitable economic growth, job creation, poverty alleviation, women's empowerment, and much more. Let me thus take a moment to congratulate the members of the Alliance for your commitment and to encourage you to keep up the good work. A year ago, I recognized the importance of leadership. Malawi, the Philippines, and the other countries and agencies of this alliance are leading in the most important way, by example and from the ground up. And Mr. Gates, your vision on digital technology and your generosity are really, truly changing this landscape. The very nature of this alliance illustrates a key point. Only by working together can we harness the transformative potential of electronic payments. In Colombia and Mexico, moving social welfare transfers from cash to electronic payments and bank accounts has increased efficiencies, accountability, and transparency. It has lowered costs dramatically. With the support of UNDP and others, elderly and disabled in Fiji now receive monthly benefits directly into their savings accounts. This greatly reduces the hardships of traveling to pick up cash, not to mention the significant cost savings to governments. The global reach of the UN, USAID, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and other institutional members of the Alliance are so important in spreading national experiences and best practice like this. It is also very good that the Alliance is looking at issues of supply, including topics like regulation, very important, supervision, data, very important, privacy, protection, and financial capability. But let us not forget to look at the client needs, or what do the clients demand. Meeting the needs of poor households and small enterprises is where we will find the real potential for impact. We really need to work hard to make digital payments a gateway to other financial services that can help people get away from the huge costs and risks of holding cash. Savings and insurance are here especially important. They both facilitate resilience as well as investments in productive activities. For example, farmers in Kenya can insure a small bag of seeds against excessive rain or drought at the moment that they buy it. The payment is done via mobile phone. If there is a drought or a flood, the insurance company automatically delivers payout again on the client's phone. You might think, what does it actually make a change? You know, this little assistance makes it more attractive for farmers to actually end up buying this higher quality seed, therefore expanding production and increasing investment in productive activities. Moving from cash to electronic payments and then to a diversity of financial services can be quite challenging. Certainly, it does involve many sectors and stakeholders. So this will require coordination and partnership around a common goal. And for me, coordination backed by strong political will be key to success. Tomorrow, the United Nations Secretary General will present his report on the MDGs and post-2015 development agenda at a special event. This report and an earlier report from the high-level panel make clear references to the role of inclusive finance to achieve development. I have been very active in this discussion because the post-2015 agenda will shape political priorities, investments, and many actions in the years to come. Let us be sure that this agenda contains inclusive finance. And let us make it bold and inspiring, have a bold and inspiring vision. Our overall aspiration should be nothing less than universal access to financial services by 2030. Every person, every business in every country deserves this opportunity. So in your country level work, please be ambitious. Establish bold targets on e-payments. Then set equally bold targets for other financial services that can be built upon these e-payments. And please do not forget the value of sharing your commitments, experience, and very important, the evidence on how greater access to financial services has helped reduce poverty, improved health, education, and food security, among many other goals. I really wish you many success today, but also in the whole partnership in the Alliance. And I hope that many more join you and you can really help each other to establish all the best practices that can actually make your success much greater. Thank you very much.
Your Majesty, Queen Maxima of the Netherlands, as the UN Secretary-General's Special Advocate for Inclusive Finance for Development, your vision can change the world. So we just hope that we have the means and the energy to be able to make that happen. So please continue to work with us as we strive to achieve that vision. Thank you for that inspiration for us today. Making digital payments a gateway for people so that they can access a range of other financial services is really important for us to remember. And that's a really appropriate way for me to then introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker represents the Republic of Malawi, who's the newest member of the Better Than Cash Alliance. They joined just earlier this year, and it was announced during President Obama's visit to Africa. And so it is our great honor today to have the Honorable Ralph Juma, an elected member of the Malawian Parliament. He was appointed Minister of Economic Planning and Development by Her Excellency, Dr. Joyce Banda, in March this year. He's chairman of the Parliamentary Committee on Budget and Finance in Malawi's Parliament, and he was previously the Deputy Minister of Finance. So he certainly knows how to manage money very well. So as the Minister of Economic Planning and Development, the Honourable Minister's role is to make Malawi's recovery economic plan viable and sustainable. And so we hope that, we know that your vision of inclusive growth is one way to achieve that. And we know that you're deeply committed to financial inclusion and digitizing payments. So we're very glad that you're here today to share with us your vision, and please join me in welcoming Minister Juma.
Her Majesty Queen Maxima, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to be here to speak in this high-level meeting, and may I quickly bring to you all greetings from my President, Her Excellency, Dr. Joyce Banda. I would like to commend UNDP, UNCDF, and the Better Than Cash Alliance for organizing this very important meeting on a topic of great bearing to all of us and of great concern to mankind today. I'm confident that we'll have fruitful exchange of ideas from this meeting. The government of Malawi is strongly committed to development and sustainable growth of the country. This has been demonstrated by its deliberate policies and the development agenda that aim at stabilizing the economy in the short run through fiscal and monetary reforms, and in the medium to long term through infrastructure development in sectors that will address the constraints to growth and create a conducive environment for investment. As a country, we strongly support the view that we should embrace a more inclusive approach to economic growth with the notion of financial inclusion at its center. The Malawi Growth and Development Strategy 2, which is a medium-term strategy, is a second-generation poverty reduction strategy that is guiding the country's development initiatives. The strategy focuses on wealth creation, not only for the nation, but also for the household. For that is the way that we are approaching our achievement of sustainable growth and infrastructure development. Growth that will create jobs for the people of Malawi, facilitate poverty reduction and human capital development, as well as growth that should provide equal opportunities for all to access business capital. The national economy depends on agriculture, which is mostly at smallholder level, with the rural population and women being the most involved. Therefore, provision of intervention directed at the rural population, smallholder farmers, and women in particular, have a direct and immediate impact at the growth of the country. Between 2006 and 2011, the country experienced record high growth rates, averaging 7%, but with very little impact on the life of the majority of the people of Malawi. Lessons from this experience highlighted the need for participation and ownership of the grassroots, the undeserved and the underprivileged in development work. Growth must be inclusive, and growth initiatives must involve all citizens including rural farmers and urban dwellers. Growth must include men and women, boys and girls. But if development is to be caused by assets of the poor, issues of banking as well as electronic payments have to reach them. Because unless these groups become part of the financial system, any involvement of them in the economic activities remains outside the formal system, which has the potential of heavily reducing on the multiplier effect. Malawi was one of the initial countries to commit to the Maya Declaration in 2011 as an Alliance for Financial Inclusion member. We are therefore committed to doubling the bank population from 19% then, when we were joining, to 40% by 2014. Amongst other things that we are doing, we are lobbying banks to open branches in the rural areas. We have embarked this exercise mostly on the banks where the government has got some stakes. We are also encouraging banks to engage in mobile and agent banking. And as a government, we make all our payments through the bank system, including salaries and allowances, and the payments to suppliers of anything that they supply to the government. We have also revisited and reviewed most of the financial sector regulation laws, including the Central Bank Act, the Banking and Insurance Act, but also other laws. I think together there are about 5 laws that we have reviewed. We know that much as infrastructure remains a big constraint in the country, there are innovations that can help us overcome some of the challenges of limited infrastructure. That is why we decided to get into this more economic partnership, like the Better Than Cash Alliance, considering ways to expand agent banking and mobile payment solutions as one of the benefits that we could perhaps get from that. One example of an investment already undertaken is the investment in the national switch, which will provide a switching platform for internet banking, remittances, and mobile money transactions. We've decided to develop this as a shared payment services arrangement with the Bankers Association of Malawi so as to facilitate interoperability and help ensure the volumes to make the investment viable. Focusing on transitioning from cash to electronic payments can help achieve a number of goals for individuals, private, as well as the public sector. We expect electronic payments to decrease the cost of doing business in the medium to long term, and thereby facilitating private sector development and economic growth. Lately, the country has seen increased volumes in monetary transactions as a result of increased economic activities. This has mostly involved movement of actual cash where necessary or delayed bank transfers. Physical cash movements have attendant problems such as high probability of fraud and theft. We hope, therefore, that the national switch will address these problems and make a business difference. The switch will further facilitate collection of information and data on the financial transactions for ease of analyzing and any future policy decisions. However, for most Malawians, cash still remains king. People simply feel unsafe and unsecure when their resources or their money is not in form of cash and they can't see it. It is for this reason that our transition to the electronic payment system should also include an emphasis on building the financial capability of all Malawians, as evidenced by the National Financial Literacy and Consumer Education Strategy. The government's ultimate objective is to migrate to electronic payments for all its transactions in the medium to long term. And we know that it is only through partnerships that we can be able to achieve our goal. This is why we are supportive of a number of initiatives and pilot programs to learn what works and what doesn't, and then expand those that do. For example, the partnership that we have with World Food Programme, Save the Children, and Airtel, where we are using mobile phones to send money to the vulnerable people, and these people are able to obtain the cash from Airtel agents. Through this arrangement, more than 100,000 farmers and their families are able to access even market information as well as information regarding payment details. The government will also focus on transitioning cash transfer to the most vulnerable people in our society through social cash transfer and public works programs. We also have got village savings and loan schemes in rural communities where resources are put together and they are linked to their members. One important objective is to ensure that these schemes are strongly linked to financial institutions to create lasting benefits for the people. There are many, many benefits of electronic payments, but challenges are also there. And these can best be tackled in partnerships like this. We are therefore glad to be part of the partnership that is the Better Than Cash Alliance to benefit from the experience of other countries that have led the way in electronic payments, financial inclusion, and inclusive growth, and look forward to sharing the progress that we are making in Malawi with all other partners. I thank you all for your attention.
Minister Juma, you have a very ambitious agenda, and so we wish you every success in all that you're doing. Thank you. I have a quote for you. If we're going to change people's lives, we need another level of innovation. Not just technology innovation, system innovation. This visionary quote is from our next speaker, Mr. Bill Gates. It captures the conversation that has been started this afternoon, but also demonstrates the ambition and scale of all his philanthropic endeavors too. Mr. Gates is co-chair and trustee of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And anyone who's partnered with that foundation knows that the bar that they've set of commitment and tenacity to the goals of poverty reduction is only matched by the results that they are able to achieve. So Bill and Melinda Gates work together to expand opportunity to the world's most disadvantaged people by collaborating with grantees and partners, and together shape and approve grant-making strategies, advocate for the foundation's issues, and help set the overall direction of the organization. As a grantee, the Better Than Cash Alliance has benefited tremendously from the amazing staff at the foundation, the intellectual capital, and the partnership that we share. The foundation's Financial Services for the Poor program is at the moment focusing on digital payments, and so we are aligned in our goals, particularly in poor and rural areas, and expanding the range of services to clients, as was already said, was critically important. So we are honored and delighted to have with us here at this global event to shine a spotlight on the role of digital payments in reducing poverty around the world, Mr. Bill Gates. Please join me in welcoming him.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to see the attendance here. This is a kind of a new initiative, and yet already gaining a lot of momentum. I'm in New York this week in a broad sense to celebrate the good news story about the incredible progress against the fight against global poverty. It's very interesting because every setback we have in this is a news headline, but the gradual year-by-year progress that's led us to achieve MDG 1, it's easy to miss that, and yet it's an amazing thing. It means that more families are putting food on their table, sending their kids to school, and living healthier, more productive lives. And our challenge now is to accelerate, to keep that as a priority, and to continue to lift up millions and millions of families. I'm confident that through this dedication, through innovation, like the one we're talking about here, that we can achieve this. Now, for a lot of people, they may not recognize the importance of digital payments. To them, that's kind of under the covers, something like the cold chain or how you train the health workers. It seems like more of a tactic. But we all know it's a very fundamental thing. As people adapt new technologies, as they're lifting themselves out, one of the things that holds them back is the lack of financial services. Their only choice often is cash. And cash is a bit of a trap. It can be stolen. You can't subject yourself to discipline policies. You get no interest on it. You don't have insurance or credit. And so in a lot of ways, it is the most limiting way to hold assets. But just 23% of poor people have access to any type of formal financial services. And if you go out in rural areas, if you go out to women, the numbers drop even quite a bit below that. So what is it about digital payments that can change this? Of course, we're building off of the huge investment made because of the communication application. That's where the wireless networks, the devices all get built out. But because these devices are general purpose in nature, with screens, processors, digital information being transferred wherever the network covers it, we can take these and use them in different areas. We can use them in agricultural information, health information, but perhaps the most important thing after communication is the digital payment. The digital payment, first and foremost, lowers transaction costs. So somebody who's trying to spend 50 cents or save $5, who would be paying fees on the order of 20% or more, and therefore would find that very unattractive relative to cash. With these kinds of systems, the fees can be very, very low. It's not just the fees, though. That's an enabling factor. Once you get to that point, then the room for innovation is quite phenomenal. Looking at what farmers need, looking at what people need for health care, looking at what groups of women want to do in terms of working together and helping each other. The whole way that we think about financial products can change in new and interesting ways. The whole field of insurance really starts to come into focus as something that's available. So giving the poor access to these things is phenomenal. Another huge beneficiary of this movement will be government payments. Government payments today are actually not very well targeted. Often the big man in the village finds a way to get part of any payment scheme, no matter what it's labeled for, who it's targeted to. It ends up in the wrong person's hands to some degree. The overhead of administering those programs, the people who are eligible who don't get access, the ability to track what goes on, that's not simply possible in an analog environment. In the digital environment, all of that becomes possible. So government payments is not only a way to bootstrap what we're talking about here, it will be a huge beneficiary. One of the examples of innovation is from Malawi, where the Opportunity International Bank created a program for farmers that when they sell their produce, they're able to deposit it into this digital saving account. And they can then be explicit about what they want to set aside for seeds and fertilizer to plant in the next year. And what was seen was that those who had the opportunity to participate in this program were 6 to 7 times more likely to use new seeds and fertilizer in that next planting season. And so then they were able to receive the benefits of that higher productivity and year by year lift themselves out of poverty. And so that's just one glimpse of what a platform like digital payments can allow. Now, to make this all come together, it's very, very challenging. Mobile providers, banks, governments, issues like how we get the cash out network to be large enough, they are willing to take the payment digitally, how we get the merchants to come in, how we get the fee structure to be low at the same time that we have the kind of interoperability that we'd like, how we get the user interface to be something that's very straightforward for people to use. It's going to take the skills of everyone represented here, and I'd say probably hundreds of more partners yet to come, more banks, more countries, more people from these vertical areas of activity will need to get involved. So we're at the beginning of this, and we're seeing really increased energy around it. No single organization is going to be able to make this happen. In fact, the path in different countries of how it gets bootstrapped will be somewhat different. Financial regulations can stand in the way. You know, how customers register in a very simple way. That today is one of the biggest problems. It's been interesting to see how we're avoiding that. In the few countries, we're moving towards critical mass. It's only 4 or 5 countries today, but as the years go on, I expect that ones that are not participating will see the benefits, and they'll very quickly want to join in as well. And that's why we're proud to be part of this alliance. The partners have been mentioned. It's a great group bringing technical expertise, resources, and a commitment to the vision. 6 countries and 10 development organizations, that's critical mass for us to get going. Queen Maxima is a great advocate for this, and the vision can become a reality faster than most development goals. So we've got a milestone. It won't be easy to overcome the various challenges here. It'll require some upfront investments, grants, governments being willing to take risk. Some of these things have actually taken place almost because the government didn't notice it. It looked like a mobile payment scheme or a money transfer scheme, and then it blossomed into something very large. As it gets large, of course, people will worry about fraud. They'll worry about cash balances, but all of those are things that we can take care of. So that's why we all need to bring our best work to this. I believe that we can someday achieve financial inclusion for everyone. So that's why we're very committed to this effort. Thank you.
That was quite a beginning, wasn't it? Wow. If that wasn't visionary and expanding your mind in terms of the possibilities, I don't know what is. But for me, it was quite amazing to hear our 3 speakers this morning and the different visions that they have. We're transitioning now, as you can tell, and we're actually going to be talking about a partnership, a real partnership that's in the Philippines between the government and the private sector. So I'm going to be handing over to my colleague Beth Porter, who is the policy advisor for UNCDF and the Better Than Cash Alliance. Beth will be moderating this panel based on her over 20 years of experience in financial inclusion across the globe, and both working with the Philippines in the range of different capacities. You will be introducing our 2 speakers, so I better get off the platform and hand over to you, Beth. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Beth. Public-private partnerships are critical to achieving digital financial inclusion. And while we may all agree on this, there are a number of barriers to overcome in making this successful. We are lucky today, quite privileged today, to have both His Excellency Ambassador Jose Cuisa, Ambassador of the Philippines to the United States, and representing the private sector, Mr. Paulo Baltao, who is President of G Exchange. His Excellency Ambassador Cuisa was nominated by President Benigno Aquino III and confirmed in his role as ambassador in February 2011. Prior to his appointment, Ambassador Cuisa was a Commissioner of Social Security. He was also Central Bank Chairman, Chairman of the Monetary Board, and concurrently Chairman of the Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation. He was also President and CEO Administrator of the Social Security Administration and the Director of the Philippine National Bank. So if his credentials as ambassador were not enough to have him up on the stage here today, I think you have all heard he's eminently, has a lot of eminent experience in this area. To my right, Mr. Paulo Baltao is president of G Exchange, which is a subsidiary of Globe Telecom, one of the leading telecommunications service providers in the Philippines. G Exchange pioneered the revolutionary model in cardless and cashless mobile commerce service that many of you may have heard of called GCash. Prior to, and this was launched in October of 2004. Prior to leading G Exchange as president, he served in the capacity of leading the Global Product Group, international remittances, banking business, financial and government services, and so he has a lot of experience in all branches of G Exchange business. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Kwisa and Mr. Bautau. So allow me, before we start the discussion, to provide a little bit of context. In the Philippines, nearly a third of the nearly 97 million people in the Philippines are living below the poverty line. 73% of them do not have access to a formal bank account. Interestingly, though, over 100% of the there's over 100% mobile penetration in the Philippines, though, as we'll hear later, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has a phone. Given the low level of financial infrastructure in the country, the opportunity is great to go digital in order to provide financial services in the Philippines. It was, the government of the Philippines, as many of you know, is extremely proactive in financial inclusion. And indeed, in its Maya Declaration, it has stated the goal that every Filipino will have access to a formal deposit account. It's in this context that the Pantawid Pamilyang Filipino program, that's the 4 Ps, was developed as a government-owned conditional cash transfer program. And it targets poor households with either a pregnant mother or households with children up to 14 years of age. The program's primary goals are to alleviate poverty with a particular focus on health and education. When payment providers were invited to participate through a competitive selection process, G-Exchange was the first mobile network operator to do so. Given that that many of the program beneficiaries do not have mobile phones, and recall that even though there's 100%, a supposed 100% coverage, many of the poorer Filipinos and those living in more remote areas do not have phones. G-Change had to significantly adapt its model to provide payment services. So that brings us to one of the elements that is so interesting about this partnership is that it's still in the stage of digitizing these cash payments. So there's much that we can learn from the ambassador and Mr. Bautau. So let me turn now to the discussion and start with Your Excellency. Perhaps you could tell us what were the government policies behind the decision to partner with the private sector for the delivery of conditional cash transfers.
Thank you, Beth, for giving a brief introduction about the conditional cash transfer program of the Philippines. I guess the major goal or the overarching goal of the government was poverty alleviation. And one important policy to achieve this goal was policy of inclusive growth within a framework of good governance. We needed to ensure that the gains of our robust economic growth would lead to shared prosperity. If looking at the last 2.5 years, our growth rates have been among the highest in Southeast Asia and even in Asia. In 2012, we achieved a 6.6% GDP growth rate. The first half of this year, we had a 7.6% GDP growth rate. Yet the economic benefits have not trickled down to the lowest income groups. As you mentioned, almost a third of the population still live below the poverty threshold. So the president has actively promoted his policy of inclusive growth. And this CCT program, in effect, tries to alleviate poverty by providing monthly cash allowances for the poorest of the poor families. There are about it targets about 5.2 million families. So far, they've reached about 3.9 million families, and the target is by 2016, all 5.2 million families would have been reached. They provide monthly allowances for as long as the children and family are in school at least 85% of the whole school year, and that they visit the rural clinics regularly. This has resulted in much better health for the children as well as much better attendance at school. So this has contributed to improved education, improved health. So the CCT is really a vehicle to deliver services by helping the most vulnerable families to ensure that they are able to send their children to school to attain the kind of education they need because we believe that education is the best way for them to get out of poverty. So we initially used cash cards for this program, but partnering with the private sector was a logical step to make the program more efficient and to achieve cost efficiencies. The program then was facing distribution challenges in areas where there were no banks or cash machines, and so government had to find creative solutions by partnering with the private sector, in this case, G Exchange.
Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing with us the government's development objectives and reasons to partner with the private sector. I'll now turn to you, Mr. Beltao, and ask you, what were the key drivers for you to engage with the government in this conditional cash transfer program, particularly when some of your other competitors weren't so eager to make this move?
Well, thank you, Beth. It would be hard-pressed for a conditional cash transfer program to be successful if the beneficiaries fulfill their end of their obligations, but they get paid way after they have done their obligations, at least maybe a year or 3 quarters after. So we saw the challenges that were being experienced. Number one, they're not getting paid on time. During disbursements, it will take them until 2 o'clock in the morning to get paid. If they get paid their $80 cash grant, $20 is spent on transportation alone. Before the disbursements get reconciled by head office, and which is a prerequisite for succeeding disbursements, it would take a month. Looking at all these issues, we strongly believe that our platform would be able to address these issues. And in November of 2010, we did a pilot with the DSWD. We did 10,000 disbursements. Previously, they were disbursing until 2 p.m. Money had to be brought in by helicopter. There were political undertones in the disbursement, as you know. If the poorest of the poor get their money and the politician is there, 1 + 1 together equals the elections, all right? So we came in, we disbursed for 10,000 beneficiaries. We did it, we finished at 2 o'clock. Not 2 o'clock in the morning, but 2 o'clock in the afternoon, okay? We did 10,000 beneficiaries. By the next month, the DSWD requested us to pay out the backlog for that past year. And in 2011, from 10,000 in November 2010, we did 2.5 million disbursements in 2011. And from that time on, disbursements were given on time. The transportation cost were now dropped to $2 at most for beneficiaries. And by the way, when the beneficiary gets the cash grant, head office, the DSWD head office, already knows that the payment has been made. So reconciliation and settlement is instantaneous. So to us, the benefit of using our infrastructure was very evident. From our end as well, we believed, look, we are a telco saying that we are engaging into financial services, okay? Banks enjoy the fiduciary role of being trusted with your money. With this bigger scale of a project, we felt that by coming into this project, we will gain the credibility that our system is reliable, credible, and really can be trusted by the public.
Thank you. Ambassador, one of the things that I think so impresses us about the dynamic that's happening in the Philippines is the great leadership and partnership between different government bodies. So this initiative was led by the Department of Social Welfare, but the Department of Budget and Management is involved. There's also been great leadership on the part of the central bank in the Philippines. As a former central bank governor, what is your perspective or what can you imagine is the perspective of the central bank in terms of the benefits for citizens of the Philippines?
Well, we're very fortunate that our central bank is quite progressive, and it's been the policy of the central bank to try to get the banks to expand their customer base, to make sure that they make it as easy as possible for individuals to open bank accounts. But as you said earlier, 73% of the population do not have bank accounts. So the central bank has been trying to promote financial literacy by providing a lot of these seminars, both by themselves and through the banking system. We have about 42 commercial banks and probably about 800 to 900 development banks. We have about 200 savings banks. So there's quite a large banking network. And the banks are being encouraged to precisely bring in more people. Now, with this electronic payments, there's going to be more of an incentive for the individuals to learn more about banking, become part of the financial system, and we see the central bank, in fact, taking a very active role in promoting digital financial inclusion. They have also been providing incentives even to non-banks like G-Exchange, because normally the regulators like the central bank would only focus on banks and not provide the incentives to non-banks, because they regulate the banks, they do not regulate the non-banks like G-Exchange. So, but I think in this particular case, they see the advantages of government partnering with the private sector, and this is why they have been more open to non-banks participating in this payment system.
Great, thank you. Well, we've heard some of the, from the perspective of the government and the central bank, the orientation towards providing the citizens of the Philippines with better financial inclusion. From your perspective with G-Exchange, what have you learned about the clients in particular that you're using in the kinds of services you're providing to enable you to address some of the challenges that you've encountered in implementing this conditional cash transfer program?
Well, they did appreciate, not having to line up until 2 o'clock in the morning. They did appreciate getting paid on time. I'm sure any beneficiary would appreciate getting paid on time after sending my kids to school and fulfilling the obligations. The challenges that we encountered with the program were only felt initially. One would be scheduling. We were informed in the eagerness of the DSWD to pay out the backlog and to pay out the cash grants. They scheduled payouts in about 2 days, and we had 2 days to mobilize resources. But that was just initially, because in the succeeding payouts, we were now able to really plot out the schedules. Another would be, the Philippines is really, geographically challenged, all right? There are areas for the poorest of the poor wherein you have to travel 10 hours by land and 5 hours by boat. And that boat only leaves once a week, okay? There are also other areas wherein you travel by 3 days by boat, okay? It's not a yacht, it's a boat, all right? There are areas which they called Turtle Islands, which is in the southernmost point of the Philippines. There are even areas which we cannot even find in the map, but it was existing. So these are the challenges that we encountered, together with some challenges on security. You had bandits. Look, knowing that there's only one trip itinerary for a boat, on one schedule, I'm sure it's very, very obvious when the bandits will start waiting for the payouts to happen. So that was obviously a challenge, bringing in millions of pesos to an area where you don't have that much security is really a skill in itself, trying to figure out how to maneuver and how to make sure that the payouts happen. But overall, these are only felt initially. And when the succeeding payouts happened, with a flick of a, just, all right, we say the SWD provides us a schedule. Lo and behold, the payout happens on time, and everybody's happy. It's a win-win situation for everybody.
Great, thank you. Well, this is the moment to ask both of you to provide some of your accumulated wisdom and share some of the lessons learned, recommendations for some of the governments who are represented here today. And so I'll first turn to you, Ambassador, if you could share what are some of the key messages that you might have for other governments as they embark on a digitization process.
Thank you, Beth. First, I'd say get started right away. It's important for governments to create a policy environment that encourages digital financial inclusion. Philippine regulators already allow digital platforms that can be leveraged by government and private sectors in delivering services, transacting with their partners and the general public. Second is to create more opportunities for public-private partnerships. We are fortunate to have high mobile penetration, as you said, close to 100%, and companies like G Exchange, represented by Paulo here, that offer creative solutions that are accessible to the poor. And third, as a founding member of the Alliance for Financial Inclusion and one of the original members of the Better Than Cash Alliance, our experience shows that digitizing is a valuable tool for fostering greater transparency and security in financial transactions, particularly in government. Together with other founding states and organizations, the Philippines reaffirms its commitment to implement digitization reforms and cashless solutions in pursuit of better governance and ultimately inclusive growth.
Thank you very much. Mr. Bautel, I'll turn to you. What are the secrets you would have to share with governments with the private sector?
I thought you were going to make me share my secrets with my competitors, but
no trades.
We're the government. Private companies like the telecommunications companies invest a lot in technology. We breathe innovation 24 hours a day. That's what we do. And the benefits of this can really be reaped by the government itself, with all these programs, all the things that they do. And the government need not worry about the commercials, which is normally what any other private company would also worry about. But what we're after is cost efficiency. And we believe that we can provide value to the government, and not because we charge a higher rate. No, it doesn't normally follow that we're always after profit. We believe that at a reasonable margin, we can provide a much better service. We can provide a more cost-efficient service, which would benefit not only the private sector, but obviously the government as well. So, I mean, the Philippine government has embarked on the PPP, which is a public-private partnership, and that's very commendable. A lot of projects now are moving. The government is now benefiting from, economies of scale, and as well access to the latest technology that the private sector can bring in.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ambassador Cuisa and Mr. Bautel, for sharing with us some of your experiences in forging an effective partnership to advance digital financial inclusion. Thank you.
Okay.
Our final person who's going to pull all this together for us is the Executive Secretary of UNCDF, Mr. Mark Bischler. Mr. Bischler joined UNCDF in November 2012 after serving as Director for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Luxembourg. He was also accredited as Ambassador to Burkina Faso, Mali, and Senegal. And he's previously served here as Deputy Representative of Luxembourg to the United Nations and Deputy Director for Development Cooperation and Humanitarian Affairs. As Executive Secretary, Mr. Bischler provides UNCDF with organizational leadership and management to achieve the goals of the United Nations Capital Development Fund. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Bischler.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Minister Joma, Excellencies, founders and members of the BTCA, ladies and gentlemen, certainly at this time of the day it is not my intention to present an exhaustive summary of the presentations and the ensuing discussions this afternoon. But please allow me instead to thank the distinguished speakers and the panelists, obviously, our partners indeed, for their insightful and inspiring perspectives on the role of digital inclusion for inclusive growth and hence for poverty alleviation. The one message that we certainly heard clearly and repeatedly today is, well, the future is and will be digital. It will be digital, but not in a science fiction or matrix kind of way. I think it will be digital in support of so many and often very small everyday activities easing and facilitating our daily lives. And this is true, whether we are living and working here in New York or in Lilongwe, in Lima or in Kabul. And the benefits are many: efficiency and cost savings, speed and security, transparency and accountability, and of course, which is of particular interest for us today and in view of the post-2015 development agenda, the benefit of financial inclusion. A few examples to document this new reality, if I may. On cost savings, for example, soon to be published research has shown that by digitizing and centralizing its payments, the government of Mexico is saving an estimated $1.4 billion per year of its total expenditure on wages, pensions, and social transfers. Helen Clark has mentioned the situation in Haiti. After the 2010 earthquake, incidents of theft of cash transfers fell by more than 50% due to the use of mobile money, putting more money, of course, in the hands of those who most needed it and cutting the delivery time by 7 days. On transparency, when the military payroll of the Philippines was digitized, the elimination of so-called ghost employees led to a 14% reduction in overall payroll. So when we get it right, electronic payments accelerate and broaden people's access to financial services, and they open new markets. For example, in Peru, the beneficiaries of electronic social welfare payments now have the opportunity to save and to build assets in those accounts that were established to receive such payments. In Ghana, another example, we have seen how electronic payments can open doors for new business models for previously excluded populations when over 300,000 people got access to insurance to help them cover funeral expenses, which are, as we know, a social obligation and an expensive one. So the future will be digital, the benefits are clear, but the challenges remain, some challenges remain, and partnerships obviously are critical. Some of the challenges are of a political nature. There are vested interests in the status quo, and there will be those who fight the transition, as we have seen most recently. Some of these challenges are of a technical nature. Important investments in infrastructure are urgently needed. Digital connectivity, as the quintessential infrastructure of this century, must not only exist, they must function reliably and facilitate interoperability. But connectivity is not only about the switches and the hardware, important as they may be. Connectivity also translates in terms of partnerships that are required to ensure that the social welfare payment actually reaches the mother and the children in the rural Philippines. As we have heard, this means that the banks and the mobile network operators must build a solid relationship that keeps the beneficiary at the center, that recognizes the comparative advantage that each participant partner has to offer, and that takes into account each and everybody's legitimate vested interest in order to make the whole undertaking sustainable. Governments, of course, play a leadership role in all of this. They are central to the partnership equation, whether it is through the transitioning of their own payments to digital, and of course doing so in partnership with financial service providers, mobile network providers, or whether it is by ensuring the right enabling environment, also balancing the consumer protection the government must engage with, listen to, and collaborate with the relevant players to make the ecosystem function in a way that helps to leverage the individual contributions of all. Such partnerships are not always easy to bring about. It may involve taking risks, making mistakes, learning from those mistakes, and applying those lessons to benefit in the end to those who have so far been excluded. A cycle that was quite convincingly described by Ambassador Guija and Mr. Baltao in the case of the Philippines. And as a matter of fact, it is a recurring theme often mentioned by those who make the transition from cash to electronic payments. Partnership, as was noted by Helen Clark and as is often cited by the Secretary General, are essential to our ability to realize the Millennium Development Goals, and they will be essential in the post-2015 development agenda. As Bill Gates cautioned earlier today, it isn't necessarily easy, but with a clear vision of what the future can hold and how greater financial inclusion can contribute to broader development results, we can focus our efforts on ensuring that the transition to electronic payments is done in a way that generates both better access to financial services and builds the capacity of users to benefit from that access. Finally, let me take a moment to recognize again the leadership, the vision, and of course the payments, digital one would hope, of the founders of the Better Than Cash Alliance, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Citi, the Ford Foundation, the Omidyar Network, USAID, and Visa. I would particularly like to commend Dr. Rajiv Shah, who has been at the forefront of this effort and today is announcing that USAID is on a path to include electronic payments clause in all grants and contracts of the agency's $20+ billion budget. Thank you very much for that. I would also like to welcome MasterCard as the newest funder of the Better Than Cash Alliance, and I would especially like to recognize our co-hosts of this event, UNDP, for their leadership in advancing electronic payments, particularly through the social welfare programs to advance financial inclusion and other development objectives. As we will be leaving this event today, I hope that we will follow Her Majesty Queen Maxima's vision and her invitation to all of us to seize this opportunity and to do what we can in order to advance the transition to digital payments, and in doing so to pave the way for greater financial inclusion and for growth that is both equitable and inclusive. While at UNCDF we are fully prepared to doing so. Thank you very much.
For those of you who are still here, I'm really glad that you stayed with us. That's it for this afternoon. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope that we achieved our goals of really giving you a new vision and new ideas. Thank you so much.